Hey there guys, this is Richard, your host, with another marvelous video. In the splendor of royal courts and the wonder of dragons, we can often forget that the world of ice and fire is an inherently medieval society, and trust us when we say that is not a good thing. Superstition, strength, and sorcery rule this world, and oftentimes, women find themselves lost amidst the fog of history and the boastings of men. But some women have risen up and made their own legend grander than any man before them, or since. Princess Nymeria led all her people in a successful mass exodus and settled the red sands of Dawn after burning her ships. Zir was a legendary war chief of the Yogosnai, who decimated the forces of Yeti in battle and took their emperor's skull for her gilded drinking cup. Zando Quo united the Summer Isles and invented their lethal golden heart bows, and we all know Denis, the dreamer. But it would be her descendants who would truly shine as examples of why women were just as good as men when it came to ruling. Today we're looking at the best example of this and what a missed opportunity looks like with Princess Rhaenys Targaryen, aka the Queen who never was. So watch out for spoilers, because there'll be a lot of those in this video. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. She is named after the first High Queen of all Westeros, the first Rhaenys Targaryen in history. While it is possible that Rhaenys was a name taken by many Targaryen ladies before their arrival on Dragonstone, only one was known afterward to antiquity, and she would be as much of a warrior as she was a queen. Rhaenys Targaryen was the second daughter and youngest child of Lord Aerion Targaryen of Dragonstone and his wife, the Lady Valyna Velaryon. Rhaenys had two elder siblings, Visenya and Aegon, and was born in the last quarter of the Century of Blood. She was as graceful as she was playful, with a mischievous aspect to her personality that her sister Visenya lacked. Rhaenys was described as a great lover of poetry and music, and when she became queen, she extended her patronage to many a comely bard. She was a true Targaryen beauty, with purple eyes, long silver gold hair, and a slender body. Though her brother Aegon spent more time with their elder sister Visenya, having been her training partner and visited the Citadel, the Arbor, and possibly even Casterly Rock with her, it seems as though Aegon truly loved his younger sister, for when the time came for his marriage, he decided to follow not one ancient Valyrian custom, but two. Aegon was said to have married his eldest sister Visenya out of duty, for the Valyrians married their eldest daughters to their eldest sons, but he also took Rhaenys as his wife out of desire. The Conquerors Three did not seal their union before mounting dragons, though, and Rhaenys had bonded with the beautiful silver she-dragon Meraxes, whose eyes were pools of molten gold. It was said that she spent more time flying on her dragon than her siblings combined, and thereafter flying became her greatest love. When Aegon announced his intention to unify the Seven Kingdoms, Rhaenys was with him. She sailed with him across Blackwater Bay on Valyrian ships and was the first person to strike during Aegon's test. Rhaenys and Meraxes ensured the bloodless submission of Castle Rosby, with the simple threat of fire and blood, words that would become the official motto of the house she created with her brother. After defeating all the petty kings around the three hills of Blackwater Bay, Aegon was proclaimed king by his wives. Visenya placed a circlet of Valyrian steel and rubies on his brow, and Rhaenys declared him king of all Westeros and shield of his people, thus becoming a queen herself. Both of Aegon's queens were warrior women, there is no doubt about that, but where Visenya was more on hands with her fighting, Rhaenys preferred to be more cerebral. She preferred to use her steed to fight instead of a sword. Within days of Aegon's coronation as the king of all Westeros, his humble host had been divided into three, with Rhaenys taking charge of the contingent moving south toward the Stormlands. When the Stormlords enacted guerrilla warfare tactics against Orys Baratheon's forces, Rhaenys responded by burning the Kingswood and sending a message to Argilac the Arrogant. She would not yield so meekly. The last Storm King had heard what Rhaenys' brother and husband Aegon had done to Blackhaddon, his castle and his line, and was determined to prevent the same from happening to himself. So he gathered his forces and set out from Storm's End to give Rhaenys and Orys Baratheon battle in the open field. Rhaenys personally acted as the scout for her levies this time, flying ahead on Meraxes and taking precise notes of Argilac's numbers and position so her own forces would be well prepared for the challenge ahead. In what is now called the Last Storm, the Durrandon forces met the Baratheon and Targaryen levies south of the hills near Bronzegate. Argilac's knights charged the Baratheon center 3 times and broke through on the 4th, but were always greeted by the fiery breath of Queen Rhaenys' dragon Meraxes. Though she could not fly due to the fierce gale that was blowing on the battlefield that day, Meraxes was no less lethal when grounded, killing Argilac's personal guard, Dickon Morrigan, and the Bastard of Blackhaven all at the same time. The Storm King was thrown from his saddle by his horse and then slain by Orys in single combat. Rhaenys accompanied her bastard half-brother all the way to Storm's End and tried to treat with Argillaic's daughter Argella, who had crowned herself Storm Queen. But before she could convince her to join Aegon's realm, she had to rush to war again. The Conquerors Three converged at Stony Sept and then rained fire and blood at King Loren Lannister and King Mern Gardener's forces, extinguishing the latter's entire line. The Field of Fire, as it was known later, claimed the lives of thousands and burned far more, but forced the submission of all of the lands west and south of the God's Eye up until the Red Mountains of Dorne. Rhaenys was also present for the submission of King Todden Stark in the north, but it would be that sandy, southernmost kingdom of Westeros is where Queen Rhaenys Targaryen would face her destiny. For after the northern submission, she took Meraxes over the Prince's Pass to Vaith, God's and Plankytown, and found them abandoned by men, and knew that she and her siblings would find no east conquest here. When Rhaenys arrived at Sunspear, the seat of House Martell, she was only met by the 80-year-old Princess of Dorne, Meria Martell. The Yellow Toad of Dorne, she was called, blind and fat and too old to fight with her hands, but her mind was sharper than steel. She told Rhaenys that Dorne would neither bow to her brother, nor would they fight them. The Rhoynar remembered how dragons fought when the Valyrians brought fire and blood to their mother. Meria told Rhaenys to go back and not return to Dorne, for she was not welcome there. The Queen departed, promising to return with fire and blood. The next 4 years saw Rhaenys come into her own as a great High Queen. She first went to Oldtown with her brother, where he was coroneted for a second time, this time by the High Septon, and then returned to the Aegon fort to begin Aegon the Dragon's long reign. Queen Rhaenys and her elder sister Visenya would often rule the realm in their brother's stead when he was off on a progress, for the king did so quite often in the early years of his rule. During this time, Rhaenys took special care to protect the small folk and enacted 2 laws that greatly protected common women. The first was the Rule of 6, which stated that a man was only allowed to strike his adulterous wife 6 times, with the 7th blow being reserved for the stranger. She also enacted the Rule of Thumb, which stated that adulterous wives could only be punished with an implement as thick as the thumb of their husband. She demonstrated the lawfulness of her 2 rules by giving justice to the brothers of a woman whose husband had struck 100 times with a rod so thick it ended up taking her life. He did not long outlive the Queen's justice. Thus did Rhaenys win much support for her brother's rule amongst the commoners of Westeros, which was a crucial aspect to stabilizing Targaryen rule over the 7 kingdoms. She was also a bit of a matchmaker herself, marrying the sons and daughters of High Lords to those of others, strengthening ties between houses great and small alike. She infamously convinced the implacable Todden Stark to marry his daughter to Lord Ronald Arryn of the Vale, though the Citadel notes that Torrhen's sons did not attend the wedding. Note was also taken of the fact for every night the king spent with Visenya, he spent 10 with Rhaenys, and it was rumoured that when he wasn't with her, she surrounded herself with young, comely men, but we don't know the truth of these whispers. What we do know is that if Visenya was the steel of the 2 sisters, then Rhaenys was the song, and her courtly activities would go on to inspire many Targaryen queens after her, especially good Queen Alysanne, her granddaughter. For 4 years, Aegon and his queens made themselves known and familiar to the lords and common folk of their new forged realm, with Rhaenys taking Meraxes with her wherever she went. But the king had not forgotten that his 7 kingdoms were still short of a 7th to complete the set, and so he turned his gaze southward once again. Queen Rhaenys was once again the first person to make their presence known to the Dornish. She flew Meraxes as she had before Aegon was crowned at Oldtown, only this time she took whichever castle she set upon, claiming them regardless of whether they were manned or deserted. Rhaenys burned Plankytown until the mouth of the Greenblood was choked with burning ships, and landed Meraxes at Sunspear, only to find it abandoned, and Meria Martell fled. She was joined by Aegon soon enough, who also faced difficulties in the Prince's Pass, and was harangued by guerrilla tactics at every castle he went to. Regardless, considering the matter settled, King and Queen gathered any courtiers they could scrounge up and made them witness the proof of their right to rule over Dorne. They claimed the realm by conquest and made Jon Rosby the Castellan of Sunspear and the Warden of the Sand. Rhaenys Targaryen had just returned to the capital with her husband and their dragons when the Dornish rebelled, escalating their invasion into a full-scale war. The Queen and Meraxes were a familiar sight in the skies over the Red Sands, and Rhaenys burned many Dornish seats multiple times over alongside her brother. But 2 years into the campaign, she would need to take a step back from war, for the Queen was about to give the realm its first heir. Queen Rhaenys Targaryen gave birth to a sickly young babe called Ennis in 7 AC, and King Aegon finally had an heir to secure the realm he'd created. Ennis was said to be so unlike his father that many people doubted he was Aegon's son in the first place. Speculation ran rampant that he was fathered by one of the mummers and singers that Rhaenys favoured, and the child would only feed at his mother's breast. But these rumours would die out once Ennis claimed a dragon of his own. Sadly, Rhaenys would not live to see that day. In 10 AC, during the vicious and bloody First Dornish War, Queen Rhaenys Targaryen was killed when a scorpion bolt loosed from the Hellholt struck her dragon Meraxes in the eye, and both rider and mount fell on top of the seat of House Ulla. She had lived 35 years, or thereabouts, and been the woman whose line propagated the entire Targaryen dynasty. She was a warrior and a true queen, but never made any difference between the two, and was loved by all, either willingly or grudgingly. It took 5 more generations for the Targaryens to have another daughter worthy of the name, but none could deny that she lived up to the reputation of her ancestors.
I would humbly ask for the favor of the queen who never was.
She is remembered as the queen who never was. Princess Rhaenys Targaryen's early life. Princess Rhaenys Targaryen was born in 74 AC to Lady Jocelyn Baratheon and Crown Prince Aemon Targaryen. Her birth was a cause for much celebration and contention, but we'll get to the celebrations first. Rhaenys had an especially regal lineage, as she carried the blood of not just one but all 3 of the first houses of the realm. She was a Targaryen by birth, that much is a given, but she also had the blood of the Valerians and the Baratheons flowing through her veins. Rhaenys' mother, Jocelyn, was the only daughter of Lady Alyssa Valerian and Lord Rhaegar Baratheon. Alyssa had been King Jaehaerys' mother as well, and Rhaegar was the direct descendant of Lord Orys Baratheon, Aegon the Conqueror's first hand of the king. So Rhaenys was the converging point of 3 great houses that forged the 7 kingdoms with ships and knights, fire and blood. Her birth was celebrated by everyone at court, for she was King Jaehaerys' first grandchild, and King Ellizaart went so far as to hold her granddaughter and proclaim her our queen to be. But that is where the cause for celebrations turned into concerns, for it was well known that King Jaehaerys favoured male heirs over female heirs, even though he never explicitly said so himself. The king's first child to survive infancy was Princess Daenerys Targaryen. No, not that one. And while Rhaenys' father followed his sister out of the womb a couple of years later, the matter of succession was always a delicate one. Queen Alysanne Targaryen treated her daughter like the heir to the Iron Throne, where King Jaehaerys would only say that the matter would be settled once Aemon and Daenerys were wed. This indirect answer directly reflected the wise conciliator's wishes. He wanted a son to inherit the Iron Throne. It wasn't as though Jaehaerys did not love his daughter. He doted on Daenerys, and when she passed away at the age of 7 because of the shivers, it took a war to bring the king out of his haze of grief. But the thing is, he had never officially declared another heir to the throne after his niece Aerea Targaryen passed away due to a mysterious illness. Aemon was made Prince of Dragonstone in 62 AC, a full 2 years after Princess Daenerys' passing, and so the issue of a female inheriting over a male was no longer a political concern, until Aemon's own firstborn child turned out to be a daughter. This is because King Jaehaerys probably fathered more children than any other Targaryen king in history, with the exception of Aegon the Unworthy, and most of their lives ended in tragic fashion, either through their own exploits or perhaps the cruelty of the gods. Aemon's birth was followed by Balon's, giving Jaehaerys the proverbial heir and a spare to truly secure his throne. But then the young conciliator turned into the old king, and his children had children of their own. Rhaenys Targaryen's birth was said to be most auspicious, for she had been born on the 7th day of the 7th moon, day considered to be sacred by the followers of the faith of the Seven. But 3 years later, in 77 AC, Aemon's younger brother Balon welcomed his own firstborn child into the world. Only this child was a boy. Named Viserys, presumably in honor of his late uncle, the boy was healthy and robust enough to be taken for a joyride on a dragon not 2 weeks into having been birthed. But the savvier political minds of the realm knew what this really meant. If Prince Aemon did not have a male heir of his own, then Balon would be the preferred Prince of Dragonstone, because by 81 AC he had not 1 but 2 sons, his own heir and spare. So while Alysanne Targaryen might have wished for her granddaughter to succeed her husband as the first true High Queen of Westeros, the deck had been stacked against her, and Rhaenys in every way conceivable, though this is not to say that they didn't assert her claim at all. From the moment she was born, all the houses whose blood she bore in her veins backed her as their next prospective ruler, given that she was the eldest and, so far, only child of the Crown Prince. But their own support for them meant little in the grand scheme of things. House Targaryen, House Velaryon, and House Baratheon were infantile in terms of historic relevance when you look at Westeros as a political entity, and while those three houses had managed to unite the Seven Kingdoms with fire and blood, they could not replace ancient custom with those tools. Male inheritance played an ironclad role in the culture of the Andals, and they were by far the most numerous cultural group on the continent. As such, it is possible that Jaehaerys did not name Rhaenys his official heir so as to not break the peace he had forged with the faith, but he still remembered their uprising and the horrors that it had begotten his family. But as Mushroom so eloquently put it in his testimony, a little sausage? Is that what it takes to be a king? And this is where the true issue between the old king and his good queen and Valyrian customs and Westerosi traditions came to a head. It was only her sex that discounted Rhaenys from the line of succession in the eyes of gods and men, but no one dared to raise their voice about the same so long as Jaehaerys could still ride Vermithor. And besides, the princess herself was doing her best to prove to the world that, sausage or no, she was as fit for rule as her grandsire. Princess Rhaenys Targaryen was as beautiful as she was fierce and clever. She had the thick black hair of her Baratheon mother, but the pale lilac eyes of her Targaryen father, making her look somehow more exotic than her Dragon Lord relatives. She must have grown up admiring Visenya Targaryen and training in the yard a fair bit, for she is said to possess armor of copper and steel, and that she was as spirited as she was fearless. Rhaenys' father was the official prince of Dragonstone, so as long as Aemon lived, no one was worried about the succession, so long as Jocelyn could still birth sons. But then, Rhaenys was the center of court and council. She grew into a beautiful and independent woman whose wit and word could be relied upon in a manner that was not seen so often from high ladies. At the age of 13, she claimed Meleys, the Red Queen, as her dragon. Meleys had been bonded to Rhaenys' aunt Ellizaart Targaryen, who passed away due to the birth of her third son, Aegon, the youngest brother of Viserys and Daemon. The princess took to her dragon like a fish takes to water, and she was immensely proud of her mount. Rhaenys would spend most of her time in the company of Meleys, and even flew to join her grandsire on a royal progress, a great sign of political importance. Typically, only the king or his chosen heirs would conduct royal progresses under the Targaryen dynasty. Jaehaerys himself had the most progresses by a Targaryen king achievement unlocked in his awards section, and he involved his sons Aemon and Baelon as well towards his later days as king, but Rhaenys' inclusion could be interpreted as perhaps a step towards accepting her as a possible heir to the Iron Throne after her father. She joined the old king at Highgarden and then flew onward with him to all four of the Shield Islands. It was at Green Shield that she declared her intention to marry, now that she had come of age, and the old king could not have been more pleased with her choice for a consort. At 7 and 30, Lord Corlys Velaryon was perhaps the greatest Valyrian of all time who did not belong to a Dragon Lord family. His 9 voyages were rightfully the stuff of legends, and by the time Rhaenys had proposed the match to her grandsire, he was also the richest man in the Seven Kingdoms and master of ships on the small council. It is said that when Lord Corlys told the princess that he had left the ends of the earth to come marry her, she replied by telling him they can return there together, but she would get there first, for she would be flying. The two powerful figures were married in 90 AC, and Rhaenys insisted on flying Meleys to the wedding as perhaps the most badass power move in Westerosi history. Their marriage was a delight to the king and the realm as a whole, but the sea snake was more than fit for a worthy king consort, and in 92 AC, Rhaenys discovered that she was pregnant herself, but as she fought through the difficulties of childbirth, tragedy struck, and its effects could never truly be reversed. Prince Aemon Targaryen, Prince of Dragonstone and Master of Laws, heir to the Iron Throne and rider of Caraxes, died due to an errant crossbow bolt let loose by a Myrish exile whose countrymen had invaded and occupied half of the Isle of Tarth. This death not only plunged the Targaryen family into a cycle of grief, it also opened the line of succession to chaos. The Great Council and the dance that followed, Rhaenys' role in the Targaryen Civil War. Recall that the very reason that no one really cared about the fact that Aemon did not have a son of his own was because the old king still breathed, and so long as the heir and the spare were secure, nothing could possibly go wrong. When the heir died, however, Jaehaerys passed on the title of Prince of Dragonstone to his spare, ignoring Aemon's line entirely. This infuriated House Baratheon and Rhaenys' mother Jocelyn as well as her husband Corlys, who resigned his post as master of ships and took his fleet and his wife back to Driftmark. But it was the princess herself who had objected first. Pregnant and torn up after the death of her lord father, Rhaenys Targaryen powered through it all and pressed her own claim as swiftly and steadfastly as she could. When it became clear that the old king could not be deterred, she left with her husband and opened a drift between the first two houses of the realm that took decades to heal. Because Rhaenys' firstborn was a girl she named Laena, the issue of succession did not immediately devolve into civil war, but when she gave birth to a son called Laenor 2 years later, the talk of his rights began gaining more ground with every passing year. The old king made no move to remove Balon from his appointed post, though, and this started one of the infamous quarrels between him and his good queen. When Rhaenys' uncle Balon died in 101 AC of a burst belly, she realized that this was the only time her family would get to make something of her claim, and so they decided to tempt fate. Lord Corlys Velaryon gathered ships and men to Driftmark to defend his son's rights and thereby his wife's. King Jaehaerys, worried that a civil war might break out, convened a great council at Harrenhal to select the next ruler of the Seven Kingdoms. 14 claims were presented at the council, including that of Rhaenys, Laena and Laenor, but it was only the last of these that was given any thought. Rhaenys and Laena's claims had been discounted even before the council heard the plea of a man who claimed descent from Gaemon the Glorious, who lived 100 years before Aegon's conquest. His innumerable sheaves of parchment were not enough to make his claim greater than anyone else's, but the fact that it was given more consideration is all you need to know about the disrespect that the princess faced at the council. In the end, only 2 real contenders remained, Viserys and Rhaenys' son Laenor. Laenor was supported by houses Baratheon, Velaryon, Stark, Manderley, Bar Emmon, Celtigar, and many other noble houses that stood by traditions older than that of Andalos. But in the end, the tally was 20-1 in favor of Viserys, allegedly, and so Rhaenys was passed over again, not once but thrice. For this political defeat, the court fool Mushroom named her the Queen Who Never Was, and the nickname stuck. Scorned a second time, the Velaryons retreated to their island where both of Rhaenys' children grew up to become dragon riders. Laenor had already bonded with Seasmoke by the time of the Great Council, but Laena claimed Vhagar for herself after it, making her the strongest dragon rider in the realm, at least in theory. At the age of 12, she got the chance to right all the wrongs that had been done to her lady mother. Laena was proposed as a match for the recently widowed King Viserys Targaryen. Though her ladyship was more interested in flying than boys at the time, she would not be aware of how big of a deal her marriage could have been until years later. The Targaryens had traditionally wed only within their own family or with the Velaryons, who had become near kin to them in the Century of Blood. Marrying Laena would have healed all the damage that Jaehaerys had done to the relationship between the two houses, but Viserys stoked the flames further when he decided to marry Alicent Hightower instead. This third slight was one too many, and the Velaryons did not attend the royal wedding. Rhaenys' husband launched a private war for the Stepstones, and though the princess did not participate, one imagines that she approved. Princess Rhaenys Targaryen was a woman well aware of her rights and her position in society. She could have, if she wanted to, pulled a Maegor the Cruel and taken the Iron Throne by force. She had Meleys. Viserys was dragonless, and Daemon more or less resented his brother. Something might have worked out in her favor. But she chose the diplomatic path because she was smarter than that. She knew that the whole realm would burn if she pressed her own claim too insistently, which is why she must have been delighted when king and council seemingly came to their senses and decided to marry Rhaenyra Targaryen, heiress to the Iron Throne, to Rhaenys' son, Laenor. Though everyone was aware of Laenor's tastes, including his betrothed, the match was too strong and necessary to be denied. Rhaenys became a mother-in-law in 114 AC and a grandmother as well when Prince Jaehaerys Velaryon came into the world at the end of that year. 2 more grandsons followed, and Rhaenys also welcomed twin granddaughters when Laena delivered Baela and Rhaena in Pentos, the daughters of her husband Prince Daemon. For 6 years, the Velaryon household must have been a familial paradise, as both marriages, though not perfect, had flourished into something strong. Blood ties were deepened when Baela and Rhaena were betrothed to Jace and Luke, and it looked like House Velaryon was at the height of its power in 120 AC, and then the Red Spring arrived. The first to pass away was Laena, who died due to complications related to childbirth, as did her babe. The second was Laenor, who died after a quarrel broke out between him and his constant companion, Ser Qual Corrie. The household knight disappeared thereafter. In a single year, Rhaenys lost both her children, and she might have lost her husband as well within the next decade, for Lord Corlys fell gravely ill in 126 AC, and it was feared that he might die. If the Queen Who Never Was had grief tearing away at her heart, she never let the historians take note of it. She soldiered on through life with her Red Queen by her side and her family in front of her, until eventually the seeds of conflict lain during her youth blossomed during Rhaenyra's. In 129 AC, King Viserys Targaryen passed away, and his throne was given to his eldest son Aegon, instead of his designated heiress Rhaenyra. The Dance of the Dragons was going to be an enactment of what Rhaenys could have done had she chosen fire and blood nearly 3 decades ago. Only this time, she would have the wisdom and the experience to fight it better. Rhaenys was a part of Rhaenyra's first Black Council and pledged her loyalty and her dragon to her daughter-in-law's cause. She personally flew Meleys as a patroller of the skies when the Valyrian fleet blockaded the Gullet, because the only credible threat to the Sea Snake's ships could have been the Green's dragons, or at least that's what they thought at the time. When word reached Dragonstone that Lucerys had been killed by Aemond and Vhagar, it was Rhaenys and her husband to whom the grief-stricken Rhaenyra handed over command of her war council. The Queen Who Never Was personally ensured that her only living grandson Joffrey did not get himself killed by seeking to avenge Luke using Tyraxes. She and the Sea Snake made plans for the defense of the Gullet and must have begun initial discussions on how to take King's Landing when they received word from Lord Staunton. Rook's Rest had been besieged by Criston Cole's army. Aegon had taken every lord and castle north of King's Landing on his way to Harrenhal, presumably, and without Dragonstone's help, the Black Garrison could not hope to hold out. Rhaenys decided to meet the challenge herself and mounted Meleys, making for Rook's Rest by herself. But with that, she sealed her own fate. The attack was a trap. Sunfire and Vhagar descended from the skies, and it became abundantly clear that Rhaenys would need more than her blinding armor to win this battle. The following skirmish was short, savage, and bloody. The Queen Who Never Was might not have seen any official military action before the Dance of the Dragons, but here she proved why the Valyrians of old were feared and respected. It was a 2-on-1 situation, and Rhaenys still went down fighting. Meleys managed to injure Sunfire so severely that he never recovered from this battle, which took out one of the Green's largest and most battle-ready dragons at the opening stage of the war. But in the end, even she had no answer for Vhagar. As the Greens routed the garrison of Rook's Rest, or put them to the sword, the Red Queen fell out of the sky with her rider, and neither rose again. Rhaenys Targaryen went out, just like her daughter, Laena Velaryon, does in the show, in Fire and Blood. And speaking of the show,
Aegon has been crowned as his successor.
she's the messenger of doom, Rhaenys Targaryen, in House of the Dragon. House of the Dragon took an interesting approach with the Queen Who Never Was. They turned her into the messenger of doom. Rhaenys Targaryen is introduced to the show as an intentional parallel to Rhaenyra, because both women find themselves in the same position but by completely different circumstances. Rhaenyra was named heir after Viserys convinced himself he will never have a son, whereas Rhaenys was Prince Aemond's only living child. He never conceived another, where Viserys had 4 more with Alicent Hightower, 3 of them boys. So, immediately there's this sense of familiarity between them, but it's always at shoulder's length away. You can tell from the interaction between Rhaenyra and Rhaenys in episode 2 that the latter clearly thinks the former is a daydreaming girl who doesn't know what's real and what isn't, and that does not come without a certain degree of truth to it. Rhaenys has seen more of life and politics than Rhaenyra has in general. The way she handles her cousin Boromund's blatant insult is genius, if you ask us, and her political maneuvering with Viserys and Laena is cold ambition, but you can tell that that ambition is more her husband's than hers. Rhaenys is a woman who, at the end of the day, loves her family and will do anything she can to keep it safe. That includes Viserys as well, and the rejection of Laena as one instance that exemplifies her enormous capacity for forgiving. She greets her cousin with open arms and an open heart when he arrives at high tide, and is immediately distraught when she sees him wince at a simple arm grab, but she says nothing in front of her king. The conversation with Rhaenyra was, in the end, guidance, and later on we can see that Rhaenys is the only one that is holding the ship called House Velaryon together. If it wasn't for the Queen Who Never Was, Baela might have been forced into becoming a warrior woman by Daemon by now, or a Valyrian sorceress or something. It's Rhaenys Targaryen who ends up playing peacemaker more often than not for the Valyrians, and also provides the voice of reason. But toward the end of Season 1, it becomes clear that Rhaenys is being positioned as the Herald of Doom, because it's she who brings Rhaenyra the news of Aegon's usury, something that does not happen in Fire and Blood. In fact, she's not even in the capital at the time it occurs, and we're not really sure in book. Rhaenys might have passed up on the opportunity to end the war without letting it begin. But there is another difference in the two, in that Rhaenys has been showing to be much more tired and broken down in House of the Dragon than she did in the books. During her conversation with Corlys after Laena's death, she admits that she has not desired the throne since she lost at the council, but it is his ambition that is driving their family into an early grave. It looks like Rhaenys will end up becoming a practical example of her own point. She advised Corlys to back Rhaenyra's claim, and it will only return to haunt her and her family. The queen who never was might have been a great woman in her own right, but the stranger comes for all in the end, and dragons are yet to defy his will. Her final moments will be the strongest that House of the Dragon will have to offer us. You can bet on that. And after it, the words that Bodmer screamed at her in jest in the first episode, but become the symbol of her legendary lifetime. Long live Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.